Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'm flying solo this week, so I'll be giving you both the Washington report and the call to action. Let's get right to it. The House and Senate are both out and will not return until after the election. Last week in the House returned on Monday and voted to pass 3 bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, the House took up and passed a rule governing floor consideration of 4 bills. Then the House passed another 3 bills under suspension of the rules. Then the House took up and passed H.R. 3790, the Fix Our Forests Act. On Wednesday, the House took up and passed 2 bills under suspension of the rules, including H.R. 9747, the Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act of 2025, also known as the Continuing Resolution. The bill passed by a vote of 341 to 82, with Republicans splitting 132 to 82 on the bill, and every Democrat who voted voting in favor. Then the House took up H.R. 3334, the Stop CCP Act. After agreeing to one amendment, the House voted to pass the bill as amended by a vote of 243 to 174, with 33 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with the majority. Then the House voted to pass H.R. 8205, the Keeping Violent Offenders Off Our Streets Act, by a vote of 255 to 161. And then, by a vote of 219 to 194, with 10 Democrats crossing party lines to vote with the majority, the House passed H.Res. 1469, ensuring accountability for key officials in the Biden-Harris administration responsible for decision-making and execution failures throughout the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And then they were done. Last week in the Senate returned on Monday and voted to confirm Rose E. Jenkins to be a judge of the U.S. Tax Court. On Tuesday, the Senate voted to end debate on and then to confirm the nomination of Michael Sfraga to be Ambassador at Large for Arctic Affairs. On Wednesday, by a vote of 39 to 56, the Senate voted against proceeding to S-Con Res. 41, a concurrent resolution setting forth the congressional budget for the U.S. government. Then the Senate voted to end debate on and then to confirm the nomination of Byron B. Conway to be a U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. Then, by a vote of 78 to 18, the Senate voted to pass H.R. 9747, the continuing resolution that had passed the House just a few hours earlier. And then they were done. Now let's talk a moment about that continuing resolution that passed the House and Senate last week. As predicted here several weeks ago, the CR that ultimately passed extends government funding through the middle of December 20 to be specific. It contains a few anomalies, including, for instance, an additional $231 million in funding for the Secret Service, but for all intents and purposes, it maintains government funding at its current levels for about 2.5 months into the new fiscal year, and leaves open the question of which Congress is going to set the spending levels for FY 2025, the current Congress, or the one that's elected in November. Speaker Johnson said that despite the setup, that is, with funding running out right before the Congress is scheduled to break for Christmas, the stars are aligned for a Christmas omnibus where leaders in both houses use the smell of jet fumes as an inducement to get members to vote for a spending package they otherwise might not vote for. Speaker Johnson would not move a Christmas omnibus. That's what he said. That leaves 2 possibilities. Either the House and Senate will pass all 12 appropriations bills before December 20, which is not very likely at all, or the House and Senate will simply pass another continuing resolution before December 20 that extends funding further into the FY 2025 fiscal year, which begins tomorrow. There will be enormous pressure to simply pass an omnibus, and I imagine it will make a big difference what happens in the November election. If Republicans can win the White House and the Senate and hold the House, there might be enough countervailing pressure to allow that CR to go far enough into the fiscal year that the new Trump administration and the new GOP-controlled Congress could actually reduce spending by a bit. So add FY 2025 spending levels to the stakes of the November elections. Now let's talk about Secretary of State Blinken in contempt of Congress. Last Tuesday, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, under the chairmanship of Republican Michael McCaul of Texas, was scheduled to hold a hearing on the Biden-Harris administration's calamitous withdrawal from Afghanistan. The star witness was supposed to be Secretary of State Antony Blinken. But Blinken was a no-show, and that didn't sit well with Chairman McCaul, who said he had been trying to get Blinken to sit for the hearing for months and had issued a subpoena for Blinken to testify for the committee's investigation into what exactly happened in Afghanistan. McCaul dropped the hammer on Blinken. He introduced and shepherded to passage a resolution holding Blinken in contempt of Congress for defying the subpoena. With all the members of the committee voting along straight party lines, the measure passed the committee by a single vote, 26 to 25. The resolution now moves to the full House, which will decide whether to pass the resolution and refer the matter to the Department of Justice for prosecution. The Department of Justice does not have a good record in this area over the last 18 months. DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and Attorney General Merrick Garland have already been the subject of similar resolutions, holding them in contempt and referring them to the DOJ for prosecution, and the DOJ has done nothing to either Biden cabinet member. Now let's talk about the latest on anti-Trump lawfare. Former President Trump, as I'm sure you're aware, is appealing the decision in the case of New York v. Trump, in which he was ordered to pay $489 million in civil fines for fraudulent business practices. On Thursday, a New York appeals court questioned whether the state's civil fraud case properly applied the law and whether the massive fine was too high. Throughout the almost hour-long hearing in Manhattan, judges made clear their concerns about whether a state consumer protection law applied to Trump's conduct. Justice John Higgett said to a lawyer arguing on behalf of the state, quote, "I'm sorry. What's being described sounds an awful lot like a potential commercial dispute between private actors." Said Justice Peter Moulton, quote, "There has to be some limitation on what the Attorney General can do in interfering in these private transactions where people don't claim harm." And Justice David Friedman said he could find another case where the Attorney General's office he couldn't find another case where the Attorney General's office used the fraud law so broadly. Quote, "You've got two really sophisticated parties to which no one lost any money," he said, before pointing out that other cases showed damage to consumers or the marketplace, and concluding, "You don't have anything like that here." Judges also questioned the size of the fine. Said Justice Moulton, quote, "The immense penalty in this case is troubling. How do you tether the amount that was assessed to the harm that was caused here, where parties left those transactions happy about how things went down?" But not everything went well for Trump on the lawfare front last week. In Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's prosecution of Trump in Washington, D.C. for election fraud, Smith's team filed a roughly 180-page brief Thursday. The contents of the brief are under seal for now, but Smith wants to make them public before the case goes to trial, and, in fact, before the election. That is, Smith wants to reveal his evidence against Trump before Trump ever sees the insides of a courtroom. I can't think of anything that more clearly proves Smith's real goal isn't necessarily to defeat Trump in a court of law, but to defeat him at the ballot box in the election. It's all about using the justice system to put Trump on trial in the court of public opinion before the election. Speaking of the election, let's talk about campaign 2024. There are 36 days left until Election Day, but early voting is going on all over the country. Make a plan to vote, whether in-person early voting, if your state offers that, or by absentee ballot. Please don't wait until Election Day. You don't want to be stuck with an unplanned event of some kind that keeps you from getting to the polls and casting a vote in a timely fashion. This election is too important for that. Now let's talk about an Arizona Supreme Court ruling. A week ago last Friday, the Arizona Supreme Court ruled that 98,000 registered voters whose citizenship has not been confirmed will nevertheless be allowed to remain on the rolls and vote in state and local elections and statewide ballot initiatives in the November election, despite a state law that indicates they should be removed from the voter rolls because their citizenship has not been confirmed. What was called a coding error called into question the citizenship status of the 100,000 or so voters. For the most part, they were voters who had received their driver's licenses prior to October 1996 and subsequently received duplicates before registering to vote after 2004, when Arizona's current law requiring proof of citizenship to register for state and local elections went into effect. That's 20 years ago. Under federal law, they were properly registered to vote, so their status for the presidential and U.S. Senate elections in Arizona was not in question. There is no reason to believe that the vast majority of these voters are not citizens. No one, including the Republican county recorder in Maricopa County, who brought the lawsuit against the Secretary of State, has said he believes they are non-citizens. What they are is people who have not confirmed their citizenship status. There's a big difference. Now to the debate. Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz will meet for the vice presidential debate on Tuesday evening at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. The debate will be broadcast on CBS, and the moderators will be CBS Evening News anchor Norah O'Donnell and Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan. Unlike the rules in the two presidential debates, the rules of the vice presidential debate say that the mics of both candidates will be open during the entire debate, making crosstalk possible. The moderators have the right to turn off the mics if the crosstalk gets too bad. And in a change to the traditional vice presidential debate rules, the two candidates will be standing at podiums side by side rather than being seated. Now let's talk about that Ukraine screw-up. Last Sunday, outside Scranton, Pennsylvania, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in America to attend the United Nations General Assembly and visit allies in Washington made a public relations stop at a factory that manufactures the 155mm howitzer shells that America provides Ukraine to defend itself against Russian aggression. Like dozens of political leaders before him, he posed for a picture with a shell he had signed with a message for his country's opponent in the war, in this case, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. So far, so good. A foreign ally under fire, does a PR stop at a defense plant, and thanks the workers for helping his country fight back. If that had happened in any of 43 other states, in any month other than September or October, it probably wouldn't have gotten that much attention. In fact, that's exactly what happened in July when Zelenskyy visited Utah and met with Republican Governor Spencer Cox. But this time, it happened where it happened, when it happened. And on top of that, it happened with the governor of the state in attendance and the state's senior U.S. senator and the local congressman. And all three of them are Democrats running for re-election. And there wasn't a Republican to be found, despite the fact that the state is an evenly split battleground state. And to make matters worse, immediately prior to the visit, in an interview with The New Yorker, the Ukrainian president saw fit to refer to the Republican candidate for vice president's ideas as too radical. Alarm bells went off in Republican offices all over. Speaker Mike Johnson, who changed his mind about the need to provide U.S. military aid after he became Speaker, condemned it as a partisan campaign stunt and demanded that Zelenskyy fire the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States for giving Zelenskyy bad advice. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer announced his committee would be investigating the alleged use of taxpayer dollars to fly Zelenskyy and his party to the battleground state. And he wrote letters to the White House, the Pentagon, and the Department of Justice seeking documents. Quote, in 2019, the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives impeached President Donald J. Trump for abuse of power under the theory that he attempted to use a foreign leader, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, to benefit his 2020 presidential campaign, despite a lack of any evidence of wrongdoing on the part of President Trump, Cromer wrote. He continued, the Biden-Harris administration, quote, recently flew the same foreign leader, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, on an American taxpayer-funded flight to Pennsylvania, a battleground state in the upcoming 2024 presidential election, which has been described as the trickiest battleground for Vice President Kamala Harris to win. The committee seeks to determine whether the Biden-Harris administration attempted to use a foreign leader to benefit Vice President Harris's presidential campaign, and if so, necessarily committed an abuse of power, end quote. Stay tuned. Now let's talk about Vice President Harris and illegal immigration. In what was clearly a box-checking exercise that may well end up doing her campaign more damage than good, Vice President Harris visited the border in Douglas, Arizona on Friday evening after the nightly news broadcasts on the East Coast were done. As she was in the air, Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez released information he had received from Immigration and Customs Enforcement that showed that there were literally hundreds of thousands of criminal illegal aliens roaming the country. Quote, as of July 21, 2024, there were 662,566 non-citizens with criminal histories on ICE's national docket. 13,009 criminally convicted murderers, Gonzalez tweeted. In addition, there are more than 20,000 illegal aliens who were convicted of sexual assaults or rape, and another more than 100,000 who were convicted of assault, roaming free. Now let's talk about an important decision in Nebraska, as Nebraska maintains its electoral college split. Last Monday, a Nebraska state senator named Mike McDonnell, a Democrat turned Republican, dashed the hopes of the Trump campaign when he announced he would not vote to change the state's method of allocating its 5 electoral college votes. That means it's possible that Vice President Harris could defeat Donald Trump in the Electoral College by a vote of 270 to 268. I'll explain that in a moment. Nebraska and Maine are the only 2 states in the country that do not award all of their state's electoral votes to the statewide winner of the popular vote. Instead, the 2 states award 2 electoral votes to the winner of the statewide popular vote, and then award the rest of their electoral votes, 3 in the case of Nebraska and 2 in the case of Maine, to the winner of the popular vote in each congressional district. Consequently, it allows the state's electoral votes to be split. In 2008 and 2020, for instance, while John McCain and Donald Trump won 4 of Nebraska's electoral votes, Barack Obama and Joe Biden each picked off the 1 electoral vote awarded to the winner of the popular vote for president in the state's more urban 2nd congressional district. It was the Trump campaign's hope that Nebraska would change that system to award all 5 of the state's electoral votes to the winner of the statewide popular vote, as is done in 48 other states. That would have meant a 2-vote swing, as it likely would have meant Trump netted 5 votes from winning the state, rather than netting just 3, the 4 that he likely will earn minus the 1 Harris likely will earn. Nebraska is also the only state in the country to have a unicameral legislature. The state Senate is composed of 49 lawmakers, 33 of whom are Republicans, 16 of whom are Democrats. Changing the electoral vote allocation system would have required agreement from 33 legislators. All 16 Democrats had already announced their opposition, meaning that all 33 Republicans would have to agree to the change. McDonnell and 2 other Republican state senators were holdouts. McDonnell's announcement last Monday ends the drama in Nebraska, at least for this year. He proposed that the state address the issue with a constitutional amendment, which would require a vote of the people next year. Leaving the possibility of a split allocation means that it's possible that the presidential election and the Electoral College could end in a 269 to 269 tie. But it also means that it's possible Harris could pick off that one electoral vote awarded to the winner of the 2nd District, and that could result in her victory in the Electoral College by a vote of 270 to 268. If you start with the 19 states and 225 electoral votes that regularly go to the Democrats, and the 24 states and 220 electoral votes that regularly vote Republican, you're left with 7 battleground states and 93 votes. If you then award the 4 southernmost battleground states, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, to Trump, and award the 3 Rust Belt battleground states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, to Harris, and you have Trump pick up a vote from winning Maine's 2nd District, excuse me, but you allocate all 5 of Nebraska's electoral votes to Trump because he wins the popular vote in all 3 congressional districts, you end up with a 269 to 269 tie in the Electoral College. But if you do all that math and make one change, you award the electoral vote from Nebraska's 2nd District to Harris instead of awarding it to Trump, you end up with Harris winning in the Electoral College, 270 to 268. Trump is very likely to win the electoral vote awarded to the winner of the popular vote in Maine's 2nd District. That means that the outcome of the contest in Nebraska's 2nd District could be determinative. If Trump wins it while winning the 4 southern and southwestern battleground states, he can win the presidency in a contingent election in the House of Representatives. The latest poll in Nebraska's 2nd District shows Harris leading Trump by 53 to 42%. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 88 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped on Wednesday, featuring Jenny Beth's discussion with Mike Gonzalez, Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mike is one of the lucky ones. Born into a communist state, he and his family were allowed to leave Cuba when he was 12 years old. Not many are allowed to leave communist nations, as he discusses with Jenny Beth in the episode, which is an extended discussion of life under Marxism and the current threat posed to life in the United States. As always, highly recommended. And that's our Washington Report for this week. Moving to the call to action, there are 36 days left until Election Day, and in many states, early voting has already begun. If you have not yet joined our action team, please go to marchtovictory.com to help get out the vote. If you live in Georgia, our affiliated super PAC, Tea Party Patriots Citizens Fund, is now paying people to go door to door. Most importantly, if you live in one of the 7 battleground states, please sign up to help increase voter turnout. We'll send you directions on how to download our new app and use that new app to reach your family and friends to be sure they get out and vote. You and your efforts could make the difference between victory and defeat in the November elections. As always, if you have a question or a comment, you can email us at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question on air, just add "for broadcast" to the subject line. We'll see you next week. Until then, be well and be active.